Never use a microphone, but it is my pleasure today to present Jordan Goldstein to you all. Jordan Goldstein is Gensler's Global Director of Design. He oversees the firm's focus on design, innovation, and project delivery. He's an award-winning designer who has led more than 8 million square feet of commercial buildings in the US and abroad. Jordan also serves on Gensler's board of directors, helping shape the vision and strategy that drive the firm's 50 offices and 6,500 people worldwide. An advocate of helping the next generation of architects and designers prepare for tomorrow, Jordan frequently teaches at universities in the US and abroad. He has taught a graduate course on design at the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned his Master in Architecture, and has previously taught at the University of Maryland, where he earned his Bachelor of Architecture. For his work, Uniting Academia and Practice, Jordan was named the University of Maryland Key Distinguished Professor in 2016. Our college has been the direct beneficiary of Jordan's involvement in teaching, as he and the Gensler team are our studio partners this semester. So if you didn't know, this semester I'm teaching an interdisciplinary course of third-year architecture student and fourth-year IARC student, and Jordan's directly involved in the instruction of the course and the development of the pedagogy for the course. So together we are working on the design of a multimodal transportation hub for a new decade that demands an active response to pressing climate and societal issues. So with that, please help me welcome Jordan Goldstein.
Thank you. Hello, Tennessee. Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, that was kind of weak. Can you hear me? Yes. All right. Well, it's great to be with all of you tonight, and I appreciate you taking the time from midterms and studio to hear a little bit of my story. And, you know, I do get to a lot of schools, and when I go around, I often ask students, you know, when you hear lectures, what do you like, what don't you like? And I hear more and more that students really don't want to hear the, here's the project, and it's a case study, and it's another one, and it's another one. So I thought I'd kind of flip that around, and what I thought I would do tonight is talk about some lessons learned, some personal experiences from my practice at Gensler and with the firm across the globe, and some of those experiences, and I'll use projects as cues, visual cues, to do some of that storytelling. Sound good? All right. But first, before I jump into that, you know, a little bit about us. So quick show of hands, how many of you are familiar with Gensler? Awesome. That's good. That deserves the pizza. So just some quick background. You know, I think everyone knows we're a global design firm, and you know, we are in 50 offices around the world, and we're over 6,500 people. But some other things you may not know about us. One is that we are very much a we versus I culture, and I'm going to flip that around a little bit because I'm going to talk about personal experiences tonight. But the nature of the firm that Art Gensler founded in 1965 is very much a collaborative practice. So the interdisciplinary studio that Rana mentioned is core to what we do. We get different disciplines around the table, and we make our ideas richer by virtue of all the voices that are at that table. And those voices may not just be in one language. In fact, we have over 80 languages spoken. And I like to think of us as a borderless practice. So it's routine for me and my colleagues to be working across the firm. And I'm going to share some of those stories tonight. When I was in architecture school, I had no idea what a global practice meant. In fact, I just thought I'd come out and I would be doing some projects, you know, locally. And that's been very different than the experiences I've had. And through that, I've realized that, you know, beyond the technological advances that are out there, you know, beyond the ability to get on a plane and go somewhere, it truly is possible to have a global practice, to work across borders, to work across cultures and geography. You know, but I put this slide up here because this is really important to us right now, which is we believe in the work that we're doing all over the world, that we're shaping the future of our cities, the cities we live in, the cities we work in, and some of the cities that we aren't, as a firm, even in. But it's through this lens, because it's really all about experience, about human experience. So the places, spaces, and objects that we create, we believe, if we are truly doing it right, we're thinking about it from that user experience standpoint. What does it mean to experience a space when you walk into it, and what contributes to being a great space versus a poor space? And great architecture, what makes that architecture great for the user? But climate change, and we all see this in the news every day, this is a profound impact to all of us now. And it's something that we obviously can't ignore. So for us, we're making this core, and in fact, in September, we announced that we're going to make all of our work by 2030 carbon neutral. So that's huge. That means for us that the 1.2 billion square feet that we do on average annually, that we are going to commit to make that carbon neutral. But at the same time, we're recognizing that there's massive transformation with regards to mobility, with regards to social impact issues, housing and homelessness, and also that there's this kind of hyper-connection happening in cities. The technologies is allowing us to think about our cities in very different ways. So what I'm going to talk about tonight, it's going to go a little bit deeper. It's going to kind of pull away some of the layers. And I thought I'd talk about 5 learnings, and I'll put them up here in pretty broad terms now. The first one is about following paths. And some of this is stuff that I wish I had heard in school, because I realized that when I was experiencing some of these things, that had I had some cues of what to look out for, perhaps the path would have been easier. So following paths. The other is thinking global. What does that mean these days? The third is taking calculated risks. We all hear this, take risks, fail fast, learn from it, and move on. But what does it mean to take calculated risks in practice? The fourth is building relationships. And this is something that I did start to learn in school, and I realized how important that is, that relationships with those in the larger context can make or break a practice. And the last one is about finding balance. So how does this all come about? So I put this up here because it is a journey, and point A to point B is not a straight line. And for me, it's been very much a line that has kind of moved all over the place, but it's been an amazing ride. And it's been one where I don't look backwards. I don't spend time in the rearview mirror. I look forward to the next experiences that are coming up. But it all started for me actually in school, and 3 very, very different experiences that caused me to kind of look at the world in a different way. When I was finishing undergrad, I realized that I was going to be 2 classes shy of graduating. So it meant I was going to walk through graduation at the end of 4 years, but I had to actually go to the summer program to get the credits to actually make sure that diploma actually worked, right? So they told me you could do 2 things. You could take the classes in College Park, Maryland, or you could go to Italy and take them. So I'm going to go to Italy. So I went to Italy and took classes there to finish off my degree. And that was my first time going overseas. I traveled around the US, but I hadn't traveled overseas. And it was an eye-opening experience and an introduction to Western architecture. And it was very much about living the classroom. So the classroom was the field, and we were out there every day, in amazing spaces and places, understanding them from that kind of user experience standpoint. And I had this memory back of one of the first moments when we were sitting out there, and my apartment actually happened to be on the Campo de Fiori, which, for those of you that are familiar with it, it's an amazing, transformative space in Rome. It's a piazza that in the morning, it's a great market. You can go out there and get fresh goods, but by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you would never know that there was a market there, because it all goes away, and it's a great social gathering space. And at night, it's almost like a giant nightclub. So I was sitting in there sketching, and I started looking at, I was sketching the buildings, but I realized I was missing something. And that was looking at how everyone is experiencing the place that I'm sketching while I'm sketching it. So how do I kind of take that in? So then I went right off to grad school, and I realized that I had this heavy dose of Western architecture. But the place I went had a Japan program. And it was actually at the time the only Japan program that was being offered in the United States. So I'm like, I really need to go to Japan and kind of get the Eastern exposure to this. So I went to Japan and studied with a Japanese master and traveled around Japan, really studying traditional Japanese architecture and craft, which was, mind-blowing. And then I came back from that, and my mind was sufficiently confused, because I had these kind of rapid experiences in a short time. And I started doing a quick internship at a firm in Philadelphia. And I was making models, and one day, one of the principals of the firm walks in and goes, "You're a good model maker. We think you should go to New Mexico and live with the Zuni tribe." I'm like, okay. So I got on a plane, and a couple days later, and I went to Zuni, New Mexico, which is, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's a closed reservation for the Zuni tribe. And the principal of the firm had got a Getty grant to help the Native American tribe document its traditional historic pueblo in a way that the information could be passed on from generation to generation, because they were quickly losing the craft of patching and making adobe structures. So I went out there, and it was this great experience. But those three things got my heightened interest in global design. And I didn't know what any of that meant at the time, but it definitely piqued my interest. So the first lesson that I wanted to kind of share, first experience, is really around following paths. And how did this come to be? I had been at Gensler, which is where I went literally right after grad school, and I was sitting at my desk, and just to kind of paint the picture so everyone can kind of imagine this, is that the DC office of Gensler at the time was 65 people. So I was 65. Right now it's 400, okay? And we're all at desks, and I get a phone call. I pick up the phone, and it's like, "This is Art Gensler." And I'm like, okay, that's pretty amazing. At the time, I think there was 1,000 people in the firm, and I'm like, you called me, that's cool. So he's like, "I'd like you to do a product design effort. I heard that you are good with the computer, and you like to get your hands kind of around objects, and the design of objects. So there's a company called Halcon. It's in Minnesota, and there's a guy named Jeff Henry in the San Francisco office. He's a retail designer, and why don't you guys go meet there and design a product?" Great. Okay, and he hangs up. So I'm like, all right. So I get on a plane to go to Minnesota. So I end up with a client I have not heard of, with a colleague I had never met, in a place I had never been. And the opportunity was to design a new product. And as someone who has my training in architecture and design, the idea of industrial design was intriguing, but I had never done it. And it turns out this company was hiring Gensler to design a product because they wanted somebody to take a fresh look at it. They didn't want to just go the traditional industrial design route. So the other challenge they put on the table was, this was in the fall, they wanted the product to be introduced as mass-produced product in the market in 10 months, which is, if you think about that, it's really crazy, right? Because you have to go through design and engineering and whatever. So I'm like, all right. So this guy, Jeff, and I met up for the first time in Minnesota, and we just started sketching, and we met this company, and we developed this product together. Product was introduced in the market in June of that year, and because it was approached with fresh eyes, because it was two guys that had never actually done product design before, it was a different take, and it actually caught the market by surprise. Won awards, was published in magazines, but it got my interest heightened in product design. I go back to the idea of following paths. Why? Because sometimes you get a phone call, sometimes you get an opportunity, and it may not be the journey that you were set on going on, but it may be one that's definitely worth taking. So where did that go? From that, while I was still doing architectural projects, I started to get into more product design. And there was a company, and I wanted to share this one with you, which is a company called TUI, which ironically is also in Minnesota. All product design, by the way, does not happen in Minnesota. It does happen in other places. And they wanted to do a new line as well. And I just kind of realized that these experiences that I had earlier, in this case the Japan trip, that those lessons learned, while they didn't show up the day I arrived at Gensler on the work I was doing at the time, they found ways to seep into the work. So this is some images, from traditional Japanese architecture and some just early sketches for the product line, and then the product line. And it was interesting because, what I loved about product design is it's such a rapid pace. A building, if we're doing a commercial building, it can take 2-3 years to get that project to reality. This is on the mass market, can be months, and which was super cool. So I kind of got this bug, and I found it to be fascinating, and at the same time had opportunities with colleagues to design other products. This is one for a company in New York, and then got a call from another company, this is in Michigan, saying, hey, we'd like to do a chair, some lounge seating, and I had never done it, I'd never really done, seating beyond the TUI work, and it was fascinating because you get into user experience in a whole different way. What's it like to sit in a chair? What's it like to sit in a chair for a long period of time? How do you make it experiential? And then with another company, how do you start to play with conventional form and buck that convention in a way? How do you start to get more sculptural? And that led to a ton of projects. And it caused me to learn something at the firm, which I think is intrinsic to Gensler, what I didn't really know it at the time, which is that we work better by blending skills. So getting different people, like the retail designer from San Francisco, together with me, creates really differentiated ideas. It also taught me about working fast and not second-guessing the work. When I was in architecture school, I would sit there at the computer and I would draft something on the screen. It would be a line, it would be a form or whatever, and then I would just kind of stare at that form and be like, is that right? Maybe I should tweak it a little bit. But in this stuff, you got to go. There's people waiting to kick this out on assembly lines, so can't hold up on that. And it also taught me a lot about saying yes and making the most out of it, about really, when opportunities are presented, being able to go for it. So that then led to something else, which is how do you mature that global thinking? So if I was able to kind of, and my colleagues were as well, to take their experiences, whatever their life experiences were, and bring those to a product, what would it be like to kind of think globally? So I wanted to share with you a story, and this is actually one that happened during the height of the recession. So just to kind of set the stage, my business partner and I, we were leading the Washington, D.C. office, and we actually had taken on the leadership role. We had about 220 people or so in the D.C. office of Gensler in 2008. So this is early 2008. We took on the leadership role. We restructured the office. We were gung-ho. Things were going great. And then September 2008 happened. Does anyone remember what happened or know what happened at September 2008? What happened? Yeah, it was a crash, right? It was a terrible crash. So all of a sudden, that work went away. And so my business partner and I are sitting in a room thinking, how are we going to keep the lights on? How are we going to keep these people working? And we're racking our brains, and we came up with a couple of ideas. One was, looking at helping companies, downsize and think differently about their spaces. The other was following some threads and seeing if there was international opportunities. I kind of drew that straw, and I had a relationship that had just begun with Duke University. And at Duke, the project we were doing was a feasibility study for an existing building that's attached to their business school. And it was a feasibility study. It wasn't really anything crazy, but we had won it over 4 other firms that had long histories of working with Duke. So it was really exciting. We were, we were loving this relationship. We were doing this work. And then same thing, September 2008 hit for them, and that work dried up. So I remember sitting there going, oh my gosh, we just spent all this time investing in a great relationship and we have nothing to show for it. So I decided to pick up the phone. I called the client representative at Duke, and I said, hey, we really loved working with you, and the person that was the senior leader there at the time, we had a great relationship with him. How do we keep that going? And she's like, well, you could reach out to him, but he only responds to short emails. I'm like, okay, how short? She's like 5 words. I'm like, all right. So I sent him a note, and it said, you know, project great. What's next? Four words. And he responds back, global vision. 2 words. I'm like, what do you do with that, right? So I'm like, great, where? 2 words, right? And he goes, India, ever been? I'm like, no, happy to go. I'm still under the 5 words, right? Okay? So 2 weeks later, I'm in India. I have never been to India. I'm in New Delhi looking at a project opportunity for Duke. And it was to look at a plot of land just on the edges of New Delhi to look at doing a business school for them there, a global business school. And this was awesome, right? Because this is during the recession. It's a global opportunity. It's like expanding our purview. And I'm standing in a field in New Delhi, and back at the office, the team was working on research about what type of construction technology is prevalent in India, the cultural norms, Vastu Shastra, which is their version of, the version of feng shui. What does that mean? So we got back together. We did a great charrette, and we started to conceptualize a business school for Duke in India. And we wanted to respect the great concrete construction traditions that they had, also abilities to allow light and air into this building, and just be able to have a very experiential place. So we designed this all the way through schematic design. It was awesome. You know where this is going, right? And it was great. And then I get this phone call, and it's like, we don't have the funding to do this. The partnership isn't right. But thank you, that was great. So I'm like, man, so I back on email, India, great, where next? 4 words. And I got back, China, ever been? So same thing, no, happy to go. A month later, I'm in Shanghai. I've never been in Shanghai, and I'm sitting at a table with representatives from the Chinese government and a representative from Duke along with me. And the folks on the other side of the table are doing a wonderful monologue in a language I don't understand. And I had an interpreter. I leaned over and I said, what are they saying? And I heard blah, 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 and I heard 50, I heard blah, 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 200. I didn't know what this meant. And they said, well, they don't want a building. They would like to give Duke 200 acres of land, and they would like 50 buildings. And I'm like, whoa. So we walked into the meeting, and we looked at this, and we like, they want Duke to have a campus in China. So if you think about it, we're on a great college campus here. How many times do you get a new college from scratch, right? Like hardly any. Most projects are additive. So we called back to Duke, and we said, we think they want you to do a campus. And the Chinese government was willing to put the land forward for this and work out a deal with Duke. So the project site was just outside of Shanghai in an area called Kunshan. And they wanted to really transform this area from an industrial area into an educational technology zone, which was phenomenal. The red line represents the hour-and-a-half drive that we were taking through the first half of the project. The dashed line represents the high-speed rail that they quickly put in that got us to the site in 18 minutes. So you talk about transformation in time. So what did that mean? It meant that we were designing a campus for a university, for a great university in a foreign country. What does that look like? And what does that mean when you're starting with a blank canvas, in this case farmland? So we dug in as a team, and we said, let's start looking at Chinese kind of architectural precedent. Let's look at materiality, both natural and man-made. Let's look at form languages. Let's look at cultural norms. Let's look at traditional Chinese water towns, which were prevalent in this area. Let's look also at contemporary architecture in China. And it set up a really interesting thing, which was, how do we bring to life a new campus on a blank canvas in a foreign country? And how do we do it in a way that can be East meets West? So I mentioned earlier that this lesson's really about thinking global, right? So this was about really broadening that perspective and really understanding that it isn't about what we think and we're just plopping it there. We need to put ourselves in the shoes of others. Those in China, that would be having a new university in their backyard, those that would be going to that university, whatever nation they were coming from, and that we were doing something that was truly actually acting as a bridge between cultures. So what does that mean? So this is some shots of the finished campus. And one of the things I realized, and this is something we were talking about in the studio earlier, is like really understanding the context that's around you. And part of that is understanding what is the natural surroundings. And the crazy thing about this area was that 1 meter, so basically 3.3 feet, below the ground, was the water table, because the area is just heavily saturated. And that's why there's all these amazing kind of Venice-like water towns that are around this area. And so we went to one of them. It was called Zhouzhuan, and we walked through it. It was amazing. And we realized that even though we had a blank farm field, that if we actually just stuck a shovel in there, we'd have water. And rather than taking the kind of norms of campus design and build everything around a quad and have this very hierarchical relationship, what if we celebrated the water? What if we brought the water up? So this campus is actually formed around that water, and the buildings actually create kind of puzzle pieces that interlock with that water. And there's bridges across that link the buildings and create places for people to come together. We call this the water pavilion. It is literally sitting in the middle of that body of water with these very low bridges that have hardly any railings, another issue, but that you can come together in. And that the other big thing we found is that what the Chinese government wanted was they wanted kind of Beijing density on this land. But that wasn't what Duke and the university campus experience there was about. It was very much a human scale campus. So it meant that we had to create the drawings, the illustrative content that could convey what it meant to have a human scale campus in a foreign land that was representative of both cultures coming together. So you can even see in that representation right there, the roof line is respective of some of the Chinese precedent that I showed earlier, but the pointed arch that you see there is representative of some of the Gothic architecture that's inherent on Duke's campus. So it's kind of finding a language that would work. And that water can be celebrated in different ways. In this case, the main academic building has an infinity pool that you walk across to come into it. And the whole facade is curved glass, like 55 feet high by about 200 feet long. It wraps around. Why? Because we felt like our statement is about education being transparent, and that outdoor spaces and indoor spaces can work together and learning can happen everywhere, anywhere. So that's what this was trying to do. So this space that you see here is literally right inside this glass wall. So when you're sitting there, you're looking out across that infinity pool, and seeing the landscape beyond. And the glass wall is really the boundary, but it really isn't a boundary, right? The crazy thing is, I was so excited about this project that we started doing the master plan first, and I got one of those phone calls, and the phone call was, since this is a Chinese government project, probably needs to be competed, which means that, it would be other firms competing. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So, the feasibility study, that ended up on the shelf. The India project, that ended up on the shelf. If this one ended up on the shelf, I'm not sure where I'd be going next, right? So I said to the person on the other end of the phone line, you know what? So it has to be a competition. Well, we have an office in China. Maybe it's like the DC office and the Shanghai office competing against each other. It's like, I don't know, I'll try it. So it goes back to the Chinese government, has a conversation, and we get the phone call back saying, yeah, okay, good. I'm like, all right, we won. So, a couple more images from it, but this is about, again, spaces and places all working together to really convey the idea of an education that's very much focused forward, not about today. And this is that academic building, but this is from the water view. This is the back side of it. And then you step away and know those lilies weren't perfectly placed for the photograph. They're actually there. But what struck me, so I went back about a year ago And I walked on the campus, and I didn't say, where I was from, and, what my role was in the project. I just wanted to walk on the campus. I went and walked on the campus and just started talking to students. And I just said, what do you like about being here? And I realized there was this pride of place. And whether that was an American student that was over there or a Chinese native that was studying there, that it was a similar pride of place. And that what struck me the most, back to that thinking global and the impact that we all can make as architects and designers, was I went into the residential building and I saw these drawings on the wall. And I went and found one of the administrators and I said, well, what is this? And he says, well, this is actually one of the local schools in the community, that the campus meant so much to them that they all sat down and did paintings of it and presented it to the school. So thinking global, but realizing that what we do can truly have impact. And where does that take you? So part of thinking global is pulling threads. And what I realized is you're building a relationship, that it doesn't have to stop there. And as architects and designers, sometimes we don't often realize that we're also kind of ambassadors for the companies that we're with, and the opportunities that we can kind of imagine for our potential clients. So Duke had contacted me and said, hey, there's this company we think you should meet. It's called the CP Group, and they're happen to be in Durham. Would you like to meet them? So I flew down to Durham and met them, and it turns out they're a major business in Southeast Asia, in Thailand. And so they said, hey, can you come over? So I went over to Thailand, and what I realized was there was a tremendous opportunity there. And that led us to doing several buildings, including this one, which, as you see over there, is a tall tower. It was the last unbuilt block of royal land in the Siam Square area of Bangkok. By the way, I had never been to Bangkok before. So again, thinking global is like, wow, this relationship thread is taking us all the way to Bangkok, such that after we started getting involved with the client, they said, you know what, you really should have a presence here. So we opened an office there. And all of a sudden, we're bringing people from Thailand that are amazingly talented architects and designers into a place that didn't exist before, into a firm that didn't exist before there, and that they're able to contribute to shaping the future of their city. So this is that building. And the crazy thing about this is, because things are so dense there, where Duke was very much lateral and flat, and we had land to play with and sculpt with, this was a really tight site. So the bottom is retail. The middle portion is a Waldorf Astoria hotel. The pool deck that you see there is the amenity floor transition. That's all condo, and there's a killer bar at the top. I haven't been there, just kidding. But designing in a heavy urban environment in Bangkok was a great experience, because I was previously doing something with our team in the outskirts of Shanghai. And it became something that I think we all now as a team, because we worked with our colleagues in Bangkok, we worked with our colleagues in Shanghai, I realized that, you know what, we may sit in different places, but these experiences bond us together and actually have some real kind of DNA that we're kind of forming together through the trials and tribulations of bringing these projects to reality. And the last one in this, so it took us from Durham to India, to Shanghai, to Bangkok, to Beijing. And these buildings, these are two towers. It's about 3.1 million square feet. It actually is going to be opening in about a month. But it was something for that same client that got us hopping from place to place, thinking global, pulling threads. And the cool thing about this is, working with the Chinese glazing manufacturer was actually fantastic, because we're trying to get curved glass, and also at the same time, you may not be able to tell from this is a breathable skin. So not that you would want to necessarily breathe the air right now, but you're building for hopefully a time when maybe that would change. So this is something that they don't have there. It's actually one of the most advanced buildings to come out in Beijing. So through all of that, I was sitting on a plane one day, and these are not short flights. These are like 14-hour flights. And I was sitting on the plane one day, coming back, and I'm like, I'm doing all this stuff with our teams over here, but I realize I'm missing the opportunity to make an impact at home. And like, how do we refuel some of the city that in this case that I live in and that I'm raising my family in. So I wanted to take you quickly to a place called Tysons, Virginia. This is right outside of DC. How many people know Tysons? Okay, how many people have shopped in Tysons? Yeah, there you go. Because that's really what Tysons was known for. There's a couple big shopping malls. And all the energy was really downtown DC. But what strange thing happened? They built the mass transit line and extended it beyond the city, and they've extended it through Tysons. So all of a sudden, now Tysons has multiple metro stops, and that triggered development opportunities. But the first one was a project that was kind of an interesting site, which was around an existing suburban shopping mall. So this is what Tysons used to look like, farm fields. This is what Tysons was looking like when we got involved. And this is the shopping mall that I'm talking about. And there's this little piece of land right up there. And what this company had realized is that the future of shopping malls was definitely in question, but the residual land around these buildings had tremendous opportunity to be rethought. So theirs was right next to a metro line. So it was an amazing opportunity to come in and design something right there that would actually be a conduit that helped connect mass transit, potentially reinvigorated the mall, and created a mixed-use opportunity. So this is a shot of the Tysons to give you a kind of a broader context, but it's kind of, you're also starting to see more buildings. So the first one for us was this one. And why I said take calculated risks, because as I came back into the DC market from all the wild Asia experiences, I realized that we really wanted to, as a team, build a presence there. But the crazy thing was there weren't that many development opportunities because it was still the recession. So we got a phone call from a client, well, it wasn't a client at the time, from a company that owned the mall that wanted to do a national design competition for this site. And they said, we asked 5 different firms. We'd like for you all to be a part of this. I said, great, that's awesome. What does the competition pay? Nothing. So I was like, whoa, really? So what do you want to see? Well, full designs. Okay, like how full? Like models, everything. Whoa. So they were looking for a mature design. So that led us to say, do we want to do this? It's a calculated risk. If we spend all the money and do this and don't get it, then we'll spend all the money and we'll have some pretty pictures, but we won't have anything. But at the same time, if we could do it and do it right and have a really smart calculated strategy, then perhaps we could really create something new for this market. So we went ahead and did it. We spent about $175,000 doing this design competition. And we went and presented it, models and everything. And we took a different approach. Our approach on this was back to that human experience quotient, which was, how do you design an office building from the inside out? How do you actually think about the experience that someone that is looking about where they want to locate their office or their headquarters, anywhere around this region, that they would say, you know what, I want to be there. How do you do that? So what does that mean? What does the building look like? What does the structure look like? How do you give them flexibility that they could change their plans around over time? So we laid out this building that is really column-free on the interior, that takes advantage of this unique site, and then also figured out something that a lot of people were struggling with, which was there's really 2 entries to Tysons. There's the ground level, which everyone had known to date. For those that have been there, it's pedestrian and vehicular, but largely vehicular. But then there's something above that, which is new, which is this metro, which, by the way, wasn't even fully built yet. So how do you bring all those people together? And how do you do it in a way that actually connects site? So we realized that if this concept was going to work, the DNA had to start at the bottom of this building. So what you're seeing here is the lobby experience and being able to come in, and whether you're a pedestrian, a vehicular drop-off, or you're coming in from metro, that everybody comes to the same gathering point. And then one step further, right here is a giant plaza, because we realized that one of the things Tyson's was missing, because it was really a mall and suburban office buildings before that, was that there was no gathering space. There was no there. So let's create a large plaza, and then let's take the mall and turn it inside out at that portion so that it actually faced into the plaza, and that there was a way to actually have a gathering space that had a hotel, had a residential building, had an office building, but had a public space that people could come together in. So we did that, we proposed that, and they hired us to do it. And the amazing thing was that we did this building, and then we started getting phone calls, because the building was 80% leased before it was finished construction. And in the world of commercial development, that's like crazy good. So there must be something in that formula. So then we started getting calls. We got a call from Capital One to do work for them just down the street, because they had seen what we had done. This is it under construction. We got called by another developer at one of the other metro stations to develop a building and a whole retail and mixed-use development with them. Another developer at another one of the metro sites in Tyson's to do a project for them. And then the last one, which was a developer that says, we got the last metro site, and we want to do something on a bigger scale than any of the other ones. And the height limit in this area is 400 feet. So they said, we want a 600-foot tower, and we wanted 3 million square feet of mixed use. But we want a great public space where people can come together, and maybe a performing arts center. So, we talked about earlier about bringing a campus to life from scratch. Now we're actually trying to create, in a sense, a community that is both pedestrian friendly, also is looking towards the future, but it's recognizing that in an area before that had office buildings only with some retail, and everybody lived away from that, they could kind of come all together. So so we went in to make the argument. This is called taking calculated risks. You go in with your brand on the line and say to the county, the height limit's 400, but we really think it should be 600. And this is why. So first time, response was okay. Kind of went back, did some more studies, came back again, and they said, you know what? Yeah, that makes sense. So go for it. So this is the next project that's in development. The fourth one I wanted to talk about is about building relationships. And I mentioned this earlier because I think this is hugely important. And I didn't realize this really well until my last year of grad school. And I was organizing an event for my class, and we were going to do a mixer. This is at Penn, and we were going to do a mixer with the business school. So, business school's Wharton, and we gave everyone options, and everyone decided ice skating. We want to go ice skating. So, all right, so we planned an event in an ice rink on the edge of campus. And on the evening of the event, everybody shows up, and I'm all excited because we're going to all interact, or it's going to be like cross-school. It's going to be wonderful. And then all the architecture and design students go to one side of the ice rink, and then all the business students go to the other side of the ice rink. It was like a bad 7th grade dance, right? And I'm like sitting there going, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Like, I went up to my colleagues, I'm like, those are your clients. Those are like your future clients. Go talk with them. Go meet with them. You can talk to each other tomorrow. But no one did. And I realized, like, okay, I may be missing something, but like, in order for this all to work, you kind of need clients, right? So building relationships was indoctrinated pretty well in me in my last year of grad school. So when I got out into the professional world, I realized that that's key. And the relationships are like your street cred. So how do you do it in a way that actually is real? It's genuine. And I realized that I'm not the type of person. I'm not going to go out to evening events every night. I'm not going to join every single organization in the civic community. But I needed to find the things that were truly me. And my colleagues were doing the same thing at Gensler, finding what was them. But for me, I realized that there was a couple things that I could plug into. And one of them was really trying to understand how to make the community better. So I found a couple organizations and really plugged into this. And that led to this. So DC has a Navy Yard. Not sure everyone knew that. Well, most people don't think of DC as a heavy water town, but there is a Navy Yard. And during World War II, a lot of the battleships were made there. And because of that, the Navy Yard expanded. And in doing so, they created these industrial buildings. This was a Boilermaker shop. There was a lumber shed building where they would dry lumber. And by the way, DC's got a lot of federal buildings. We don't have a lot of like industrial buildings. So when after World War II, the Navy Yard went back to its old boundaries, and you had these buildings that just sat there. These amazing buildings that just sat there because no one could figure out what to do with them. So lo and behold, a developer goes to the government and says, we think we can do something there, and forms a private-public partnership to do it. And that gave us an opportunity to breathe new life into these buildings. And through those relationships, we were able to work with them to take a Boilermaker shop, as an example, and make it a vibrant multi-retail tenant destination with offices above, and something that was the first building done, so it became kind of the anchor to this. And then go to that lumber shed, which was used to store lumber, which, by the way, when we did our historic kind of review, found out it was one of the first reinforced concrete buildings on the East Coast. A train literally ran through the building, it would put off lumber, and it would dry. So that was what it looked like. But it was historic, so we had to figure out how to deal with that. So again, back to relationships, figuring out the relationships that would help us be able to have a dialogue. We started to look at how to celebrate the structure, but also make it a usable building. And this is what it came out to be, which is the structure is within, and we kind of took a jewel box approach, where you basically are wrapping that building in glazing, but that's celebrating that original concrete structure within, and that the area where the train went down the middle becomes this atrium that brings you to the office space above and lets the retail exist down on the bottom level. And it became this vibrant space. And then working, again, with great partners, in this case a wonderful landscape architect, to figure out how to make the spaces around it equally inviting. And by the way, this little canal is like the best swimming pool in DC right now. And then they said, well, how do you complement that? So this is a building adjacent to that we developed that, in a sense, starts to pull from some of that water vernacular, naval vernacular, and, in a sense, almost lumber, like built from the lumber of the lumber shed, is now a urban winery, in this city. And the crazy thing about this is we did all this with the hope of making impact on our city. And last year, Forbes magazine named this new neighborhood, which is called the Yards, one of the 12 best new neighborhoods in the world, which is crazy, right? Because what happened is it took what was a back door of the city and really made it a front door of the city. It made it something that people wanted to be at. So the last thing I wanted to leave you with is one that I think is important to all of us as students, right? All of you as students, which is finding balance, right? The profession of design is amazingly rewarding. It can take you all around the world. It gives us the opportunity to make places, spaces, and objects that have a tremendous impact to the human experience, and obviously can shape cities. But it can be all consuming. It could be 24/7, and it's a profession where we strive for perfection. So we need to find the right balance. And one of the things that hopefully this talk conveys is that living informs design, and that it's important for us to be able to, as architects and designers, to go have experiences and bring those experiences to the table and live outside of the screen. So I wanted to take you to Flint Hill. So Flint Hill is in Virginia. And why do I want to take you to Flint Hill? Because me and my family, I have two daughters, 13 and 17, and my wife, we're trying to figure out what is our balance. And when we were at home, our home was basically like Grand Central Station, because everyone's coming in and out, there's different activities, and I used to joke that we don't do nothing well because we can't just sit down and do nothing, because we're all moving around. So how do we figure out how to find balance? How do we find our zen? So my wife and I had been saving for years that we wanted to build a modern house right in the DC urban area, and actually like in our same neighborhood. And then when we went out to go try to do that, we found that the price of land was crazy. And there were bidding wars on property before they even hit the market. So we're like, well, we're not going to do this. We don't want to squash the dream, though. So we went an hour and 15 minutes outside the city, and we bought farmland. We bought rural farmland. So rural that I was in my office shortly after we bought it, and I get a phone call, and it was from the county commissioner of Rappahannock County, which Flint Hill is in. And they said, your land is in agricultural use. What are you farming? I was like, what am I farming? What are my options? And they said, well, the first one is cattle. I'm like, you mean like a herd? And they're like, yes. I'm like, well, how many animals are in a herd? And they're like, more than one. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not going to happen. So what's the next one? They said, produce. So I'm like, I could grow grapes and have a winery? And they said, no, that's entertainment. You can't do that. You have to grow corn. I'm like, well, that's not going to happen either. I said, well, what's the third one? I was hoping the third one was good. And they said, hay. I said, isn't hay just dead grass? They're like, yes. I said, I'm a hay farmer. So we became hay farmers in Flint Hill. And we wanted to build our zen. So we built a house that all of us were involved in. And the emergence of this project also created a craving in my 13-year-old daughter to be an interior designer. The older one wants to go into theater and psychology, so at least I got one, right? So this is our house. And what's interesting is when we talk about living and bringing those experiences to the table, and when you sit down to design something, you wonder what seeps out, what comes out. And when I sat down with the family to talk about this, I started to think about all those barns that I've driven by in my life. Those barns with those stone bases, sometimes with a cantilevered main level. What does that look like in a modern day? And then I also thinking about, if we're going out to the country to find our zen, we don't want to be sitting inside a box with no windows. So how do we bring the outside in? And how do we celebrate the color and the life around us? And then how do we do that in a way that, allows us to be together? So the center is a great room where we can all be together. The walls are glazed and open with views of the surrounding area. And the parts of this are all about being together. So whether it's a staircase or whether it's the big counter at the kitchen, we can all be together as a family. And what I found was that in doing this, we were able to find our balance. And my daughters, who were so busy that when we would come out here, could just be together, and that we could all be in the same space and actually appreciate each other. And the good result of this probably helps reinforce my daughter wanting to be an interior designer, is that it ended up getting a ton of publicity, which is really good. So that when my daughter then saw this in the magazine stands, on the cover of Dwell, or in Architect magazine, or Home and Design, that they realized that actually, if you really believe in this stuff, it can get some exposure. So I leave you with these 5, and the journeys that all of you are on in your respective careers, and I hope that they provide some value and can serve as some cues that when you get to those paths, that what may seem like not the one you wanted to take, that it could be an amazing exit ramp that could create an even richer career in design. So thank you very much. So I think we have a few minutes for some questions. Any questions? One way in the back.
Thank you. That was very inspiring to watch your story unfold for us. I have a question about Shanghai with the Duke campus.
Sure.
No, sorry. It was the next one. It was
Bangkok?
Bangkok, yes. So you build one building, it gets attention. The next person wants to build a building. And then it happens again in this sort of area outside of Washington. Did you learn anything from that experience in Bangkok? Do you have a sort of new intuition of, if this goes successful, then people are going to start wanting more of it in the same area. How do you sort of build your own context within a new sort of not very developed district, or you know, how do you like sort of make your own context intuitively and then keep designing for it?
Yeah, a great question. So one of the things I learned in Bangkok that I think actually served well for going into the suburban DC community was, because of that site in Bangkok, we had to figure out what does vertical mixed use mean. Like when you're stacking program and you have to get people up and down and you still want all these things to be really great programmatic experiences, how do you do that? And how do you do it in a way that people actually feel comfortable, living here, sleeping there, spending money down here? And when I got back to Virginia, I realized that we had a really interesting opportunity as a firm, for Gensler, to really make a statement on what does mixed use really mean? Because in a city like DC that had, that even though this stuff was a little taller in the surroundings, DC has a height limit. So you can't really kind of explore vertical mixed use. But right out in the burbs, you could. So that solution, for instance, with the metro and the plaza and recognizing that you could create a way to bring everybody together directly stemmed from the experiences in Bangkok. I don't know if we would have come up with that solution had we not had the Bangkok experience prior to that. And the interesting thing about doing that showed other people in the suburban community that actually Gensler understood how to deal with mass transit. How to make mass transit and buildings connect and make places that would bring people together. So that, I think, was part of the calling card. And so I do think it's, one of the things I think it's kind of intrinsic in the profession. Like you finish a project, you move on to the next one. I think it's really important that for all of you in your careers, and I learned this, probably the hard way, which is that as you finish a project, stop and think about what were the key takeaways. What were the key experiences that are worth noting that may serve you well going to the next thing? And it may not be the immediate next one, but it could be the one after that or the one after that. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the great lecture. I think one of the images that was actually the slide before this is the Olympic proposal for DC, I believe.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious kind of what global understandings you were able to apply to it and what it meant to reinterpret the culture of your home city, that kind of project.
Yeah, thanks. I got to tell you, we talk a lot about, things that worked. Well, the Olympics was something that actually didn't work for DC, but it was probably the best experience in my professional career. So just to give some context on that, got a call one day to a colleague got the call, which was would Gensler like to be part of putting together DC's Olympic bid for the 2024 Olympic Games? We said, sure. So he and I went to that first meeting, and it was amazing. It was civic leaders, it was business leaders from Maryland, DC, and Virginia. And like, how often do they come together? Like, not really. So we sat around the table and talked about what could this city look like. And instead of thinking about, how do you make an Olympic Games, we took a different approach. We said, what would the city look like in 2050, whether there was an Olympics or not, and how could an event like the Olympics be a catalyst to get us to that vision? And it was an amazing exercise. And we laid out an Olympic plan that took all the venues that were often they're white elephants, right? They're created and they sit around and they fall apart because they don't have uses for them. And we actually made a whole series of temporary facilities that would basically have a zero footprint. You would take it away when it's done, but all the infrastructure that was coming in around that would be benefits to everybody in the city and would grow the city. So we went to the Secretary of the Interior at the time and got permission to have events like stadiums on the National Mall. And we went through all this, and we had to present. I went and presented to the United States Olympic Committee, and they loved the plan. They thought it was absolutely the best plan. But when it came down to it, what was the hiccup? Is they didn't know how they could sell Washington, D.C. to the international community. Obviously you could argue that D.C. is an amazing series of neighborhoods, but they were worried that it be perceived as the government. And whatever whatever government of the time. It's just the government. So so it didn't happen. So we ended up, we got to the finals. There were 28 cities in the U.S. that were asked to do it. We made it to the final 4. Plan was ranked the best, but it went to LA, which ended up working out the deal to be 2028 and Paris to be 2024. But the experience was unbelievable. And back to building relationships, the people that were involved, the owner of the Stanley Cup winning Washington Capitals was on it before they won the Cup. People that were driving business in the market, civic leaders, we formed all these relationships. And after that, everyone was like, we loved working together. Let's figure out other ways to make our city better. And that led to all these other projects. Thanks for asking. Any other questions? One in the front.
How often do you have the opportunity to travel to the other offices,
Yeah, great. A ton. The question was, how often do I travel to other offices? One of the cool things about Gensler is we promote a lot of fluidity. We want people to network around. And so I'm usually at a different office at least once a month. Next week, I'll be in like San Francisco and LA, and our office is there. And what's amazing is that each office that you go to, so DC is the 3rd largest of the Gensler offices. We're 400 people. New York is 800 people, LA 700, but yet you can go to some offices like Baltimore, Maryland, and it's 35 people. So there's all these different scales. They're all Gensler, but they really are local first. So they're local before they're global. So you go to each one and there's a vernacular that's really special. It's really kind of wonderful to see. So I love doing that, and I love experiencing it. But I also love going to the international offices, and right now, can't really go to some of those because of the issues overseas with the virus. But it has been, you go over there and you walk in an office and you don't hear English, but it's still Gensler. And it's pretty amazing. Yeah, question in the back. It was interesting because I think the gut check would have been to do that, to have the School of X over here, School of Y over there. And working with Duke, we said, actually, no. Because it was a campus that was starting out and we were doing this first phase, it was actually, I didn't share it with everyone, so it was 7 buildings, about 750,000, 800,000 square feet total. There was an academic building, central academic building. There was an administration building, and these other different buildings, but they were for everybody. So all programs were having their classes in the academic building. All the faculty were together in the admin building. In fact, we also, because it was a foreign campus, we created a faculty residence building where all the faculty from the different programs would live together. But we did it in a way that it actually was forced collaboration. So we central spaces, courtyards, et cetera, that brought everyone together. So it was a really interesting opportunity to rethink what a campus of tomorrow could be, recognizing the challenges of today. Last question in the back. Yell it out, belt it out. Oh, ooh, that's a loaded one. So unfortunately, I only got a little tour today. Okay, so here's what this is. Do I like this building? I find that architecture buildings pretty much across the globe and architecture design school buildings have similar issues. I'll keep it at that. So I love the atrium space. But one of the things that I would try to figure out, would love to figure out, is I'm a huge college football fan. And I love the college football experience. And when you have a stadium that's at the center of campus that is such a draw, and I recognize Tennessee football is going through a little bit of rebuilding. Did I say that lightly? Was that politically correct? Okay. Is that there's a huge opportunity to make a building that isn't used that often an actual contributor to the campus experience, not just the steel thing over there. So I noticed that today, that wherever I went on campus, pretty much I had some view back towards the stadium. And it seems like there's an opportunity there to make that space and place more accessible, more architecturally connected to the rest of the campus, and from a spatial standpoint, not something that you circle around as an island that perhaps has some permeability that you could use on a regular basis. So that's it. Thank you all very much.